Okay, we're going to look at absolute value equations today. So we already know that the absolute value of anything has to be positive. So the absolute value of 4 is 4, and the absolute value of negative 4 is still 4, because the number that's in the absolute value bars, we want to know how far away it is from 0. And both of these numbers, if I draw a number line with 0 in the middle, are 4 units away from 0, right? So the absolute value of a number is its value from 0. So we're going to look at this in equation format today. So if we have something that looks like this, x plus 2, the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 6. So let's think about this from a mental math standpoint. What number has an absolute value of 6? Well, 6 has an absolute value of 6, and negative 6 has an absolute value of 6. So that means that we need x plus 2 to equal 6 and to equal negative 6, because both of those numbers have an absolute value of 6. So the way we solve this is by splitting this into two different equations. So we are going to split into two equations. And there's going to be a positive equation, and there's going to be the negative version. All right? So that's going to look like this. We're going to say x plus 2 equals 6, and x plus 2 equals negative 6. So we've split this into two equations, the positive version and the negative version. So from here, all we have to do is solve for x. Solve for x. That's our next step. So if we look right here, what plus 2 equals 6? Well, if we subtract 2 from both sides, we get x equals 4. And if we come down here, what plus 2 equals negative 6? Subtract 2 from both sides, and we get negative 8. So we have two answers for this. And if I check them, they both should work. So what if we do that? What if we check these really quick just to prove this works? So if we check, I'm going to come over here. And remember, my original problem is the absolute value of x plus 2 equals negative 6. Well, if I put in 4, so the absolute value of 4 plus 2 equals 6. I don't know why I just said that. Sorry. This is a 6. The absolute value of 4 plus 2 equals 6. Yep, the absolute value of 6 equals 6. That works. And then if I check it again, the absolute value of negative 8 plus 2 equals 6. I get negative 6. And the absolute value of negative 6 is, of course, 6. So we have 3 steps. Split it into two equations, a positive and a negative. Solve for x, and you will have two answers. Let's take a look at another one. This time we're going to have the absolute value of x minus 9 equals 4. Okay, so split into two equations, one positive and one negative. That means I am going to take my 4 and I'm going to make it positive, and then over here I'm going to make it negative. I'm going to remove my absolute value. So x minus 9 equals 4, and x minus 9 equals negative 4. My positive and my negative. Solve for x. Add 9 to both sides. and I'm going to get x equals 13. Over here on this side, add 9 to both sides. X equals negative 4 plus 9 is 5. Good job. Okay. If we check our answers, that works. Put my 13 in for x. The absolute value of 13 minus 9 is 4. The absolute value of 4 is 4. Put in my 5. 5 minus 9 is negative 4. The absolute value of negative 4 would be 4. Okay, let's try the next level. What if we have 5 times x minus 2, the absolute value of x minus 2, equals 20. Now we said to split it into 2, but there's actually a step that comes right before that. So the first thing we really have to do that was already done for us before is isolate the absolute value. So you first really have to isolate the absolute value. And in this case, that means we need to divide both sides by 5. And that's going to leave us the absolute value of x minus 2 equals 4. Now we're back to where we were before, and we can pick up. Our next step is to split into 2 equations, right? And those are going to be a positive and a negative. So here we're going to split into 4, and we're going to split into negative 4. So x minus 2 equals 4, and x minus 2 equals negative 4. Add 2 to both sides, and we get x equals 6. And on this one, x equals negative 2. So then we just did the third step, which was solve for x. And the final step that says you should have 2 answers. All right. So that isolating the absolute value is only when needed. So, and remember that absolute value bars function like brackets. So if a number is written directly in front of them, it's multiplying. And the opposite of multiplying is dividing. Let's try a different example. What if we have 2 plus the absolute value of x equals 10? All right. Our first step, we said, is to isolate the absolute value. So in this case, I need to subtract 2 from both sides. So if I do that, I'm going to get the absolute value of x equals 8, right? 2 plus what number equals 10? 8. So now I'm still going to do the same thing. This might be obvious, but let's try. So I'm going to split into my 2 equations. So 8 and also negative 8. And then I'm going to say x equals 8 and x equals negative 8. And there's my answers. Now, there's one thing that might pop up that I want you to be really careful of. What if we have the absolute value of 2x equals negative 4? Now, you might want to just dive right into this problem, and I can see why. But what is this really asking you? Does anything have an absolute value of a negative number? No. This is not possible. An absolute value must be positive. Absolute value must be positive. So make sure that whatever your absolute value equals is not a negative number. Your x value can be negative, but your absolute value must be positive. So just watch out for that. They'll pop up here and there periodically, and you don't want to let them catch you. Don't let that confuse you with something that looks like this, though. What if we have -2 times the absolute value of x equals -10? Now, you should be suspicious because you're seeing a negative. That's good. You want to be suspicious, but then look and see what happens. In this problem, to isolate our absolute value bars, we need to divide this -2. So if we divide both sides by -2, we end up with the absolute value of x equals 5. And 5 is positive, so we're okay. So this one will work. But at the beginning, it didn't appear that way. Then, of course, if we continue on with this, we would divide this into x equals 5 and x equals -5 as our two equations, which are then our answers. So be careful of that one. Should we try one more example? What if we have this? What if we have the absolute value of x plus 2 divided by 3 equals 4. In this case, we're still going to go right back through. We're going to isolate our absolute value. This has division, so in order to remove that division, we need to multiply both sides by 3. This is going to leave us the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 12. Separate into your two equations, one positive, one negative. So x plus 2 equals 12, and x plus 2 equals -12. Solve for x, subtract 2 from both, and you're left with x equals 10, and x equals -14. Be careful. Remember, when you move to this step, there are no absolute values here. It's an intermediate step that doesn't use the absolute value because we're just focusing on the inside. All right, good luck.